The memory verse for today is Philippians 4:12 through 13, which says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. The secret of being content. Paul says, I've learned the secret of being content. Has that phrase ever gotten to you before? I remember the first time I read this passage, I was at summer camp. It was like, I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, and I asked my counselor, what does content mean? What does being content mean? And he told me this. He said, content is when you're completely happy with life. You don't wish that you were somewhere else. You don't wish you were with someone else or had something else or feeling some other kind of way. He said, when you're content, you're completely full of peace and of happiness. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know that was a thing. You think as a 5th or 6th graders, what do they have to worry about, right? They should be content. But when you're a 5th or 6th grader, you have things you want. You want that other toy, or you want to be in high school, or you want to be with that girl. And so I was like, wow, God could really make me content, make me fully happy and at peace with life. And so the entire week at summer camp, I then spent like searching through the Bible. Okay, what is the secret? What's the secret of being content? And how can I get that? And I prayed to God that whole week, God, show me what Paul's talking about here, what it means to be content. And at the end of the week at camp is presentation. I've talked about it before. It's that skit that the staff puts on, and it's kind of like a final worship experience. And at that moment, like just a wave rushed over me. And in that moment, I felt just that happiness. And what Paul must have been talking about of being content. Because everything just kind of blurred out around me. I just worshiped, and every worry that I had just kind of was washed away for that moment. And after a presentation, you're supposed to get with your cabin. You're supposed to always have a buddy with you wherever you go around camp. But I found myself just wandering off into a field. I laid down and stared at the stars and was like, God, you're so awesome. I was totally not where I was supposed to be, but it didn't matter because I was just in this joyful, content experience. God desires for us to be content. If you read anything that Jesus taught, if you read the Gospels, you'll see that He blesses the weak and the poor, not with earthly rewards. He doesn't give them a big mansion or power, but instead He gives them a different type of reward, right? He gives them heavenly rewards. And the 3 wise men, you think, the 3 wise men brought Jesus the gifts of this world, right? They brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. But the presents that Jesus brought us in return were the presents of peace and love and joy and life everlasting. Right? Because Christ desires for us to be content, to be filled with heavenly rewards instead of the rewards of this world. And the thing about these heavenly rewards and the riches of God is they are not scarce, but they are plentiful, bountiful for all to experience and to be filled with. So what is the secret of being content? How do we obtain it? How do we get there? Well, that could probably be a whole sermon series in and of itself. So today we're going to talk about how money and how we deal with it influences our ability to be content in life. And how money enters that is pretty simple. When you read the Bible, Jesus once said, no one can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And so today's message, the point of today's message will be this: to let go of your desires for money and let God have your whole heart. And to do that, we're going to kind of focus on that concept of letting go and letting God. Has anyone heard that phrase before? I hear it all the time. It's like in little pictures people post on Facebook, let go, let God. And I've heard some stories that have kind of illustrated it. Someone told like a true story, and I couldn't remember the way it went. So I kind of made up my own variation. So this isn't a true story. But there's this guy, let's call him Dan. Dan is he's going on a hike in the wilderness, not in the wilderness of Kentucky or of Indiana, because this wilderness had cliffs and some various terrain and stuff. And as he was looking over the cliff, he got too close and slipped and fell off the cliff. And as he was falling, he grasped onto a root in the side of the cliff. And he's hanging there. He's holding on by that root. He looks up and he sees, there's no way I can climb out of this. There's nothing I can hold on to. And he looks down, and it's still kind of in the morning, so there's fog, and he can't really see just how far this cliff goes down. And he calls out, "Is anyone out there? Can anyone help me?" And Dan's holding on to the root for dear life, and he calls again, "Is anyone out there?" Crickets. And then all of a sudden he hears a voice. He says, "Dan, let go of the root." And Dan's like, "What? No, go get a rope, go get a helicopter, search party, something, anything. I'm not going to let go. I need you to help me and pull me off of this cliff." And again, the voice says, "Dan, let go." And so Dan says, nope, I'm holding on and I'm waiting for help. And then after a while of holding on, the root finally breaks. And he falls about 5 feet until through the fog he lands safely on the ground. And the point of the story, and I probably messed it up a little bit, but the point of the story is that we can't see the full picture. All right, we can grasp on tightly to our situation as we can, but sometimes we must have faith in God and listen to Him because He sees the bigger picture of what's going on. And so the passage we'll be using primarily for this discussion is in 1 Timothy, and that's 6 through 11. And it goes like this: "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. The very first verse there, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." Now, why did Paul take the time to write "and contentment"? I mean, I would figure godliness is great gain, right? To be like God. But Paul felt it necessary to include contentment, to be at peace with where you're at, to be full of happiness in any situation. And in the next verse, he says, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it." Now, there's a key concept that is used in other places in the Bible, and we sing about it in different ways. For we brought nothing into the world, and we'll take nothing out of it. You might have heard it as "the earth shall soon dissolve like snow." Or "from dust you came, and to dust you shall return." Have you heard any of those before? Yeah, it's this idea of impermanence is what Paul is tapping into. And it is critical for understanding and allowing ourselves to let go of our grip on our finances or of anything. This idea that the world is temporary. This life is temporary. All we can see right now is the cliff that we're on and the root that we're holding, but God sees the bigger picture. Francis Chan, in one of his talks, kind of put it this way. He brought out like a 100, 200-foot rope, and he put tape on the end of it. He said, "This is your life on earth." And then he tossed out the rope like this, and he said, "This is life in eternity." Right? Our life on earth is just but a speck. And when we shift our perspective, we can have a shift in values. When we just see our life on earth, it makes sense to accumulate all the wealth we can, to accumulate all the power we can, and whatnot, and be great and successful at this life on earth. But when we look at it from the different perspective, from the eternal perspective of the life God has for us, our values kind of shift, right? Instead of seeking the earthly gains, we then seek the heavenly gains of peace and of joy and of love and satisfaction. But still, once we are able to shift our perspective, we must take that leap of faith of following God in that. Because it's difficult. It's difficult to see the eternalness of life. It's difficult to see that eternity when all we see is what's in heaven, and when our whole culture and the world is wrapped around this idea of taking these 100 years of your lives and making the best of it, or gaining all the success. But we must take a leap of faith into a different type of life. And if we keep our lives free from the love of money, and if we be content with what we have, God says He will never leave us and He will never forsake us. And so God gives us all kinds of reassurances in the Bible in that a leap of faith. Do not be afraid. Do not be worried. Right? Have faith. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. He has promised to be with us. He has entered in that covenant, and like we're discussing in our Bible study on Tuesday nights, He is faithful no matter what we do. He is faithful to His end of the bargain. And so I want to take a moment and I want to point out that is a lot easier said than done. It's a lot easier for a 5th or 6th grade me to let go of my desires for what is next in life and be content than what it is now. I'm beginning to understand the struggles of that in real life. I just had to get a cell phone plan and start paying a cell phone bill, and that was a lot more expensive than I thought it was going to be. But that's why it's so important to tithe regularly. And because when we tithe, when we give the first of what we have, the first of our time, is a reminder and a resetting of our heart on God and not on our money. If we keep a hold of our money and we make it our master, what will happen? In 1 Timothy 6, Paul wrote this in verses 9 and 10. He said, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Evil, grief, sorrow, these are the fruits of worshiping our money, of giving our heart to our wealth. But Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. See, God knows the real desires of our hearts. Our desires are manipulated by the world and our ability to obtain them. So like if we desire love and appreciation and acceptance, and if we try to obtain that ourselves, it will often turn into lust. And for guys a lot of my age is pornography and turning to all of these things, because that is the worldly easy form of that love and that acceptance. If we value safety and security and we try to gain that ourselves in the world, it'll turn into hoarding, into selfishness, into stockpiling things away, and even more insecurity. If we value or truly desire rest, but then try to obtain that through the ways of the world, it'll turn into gluttony of consuming all kinds of food and going to the movies and getting whatever our heart's desires. But Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall not thirst." Because when we try to fill our own desires, they just end up not getting filled. They continue to just pile on more desire and more desire and more desire. But if we turn to Jesus and if we take the bread of life and the true living water, He will satisfy our hunger and He will satisfy our thirst. And if you read verses 11, "But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness." This is the fruit of chasing after God. And so we've got the fruit of our money and serving that master, and that is ruin, destruction, evil, and many griefs. And we have the fruit of making God our master, which is righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. There's a key word in there that I want to point out, and that's flee. But you, man of God, flee from all of this. When I think of the word flee, I think of Joseph when he was being tempted by the Pharaoh's wife in the bed, and she tried to seduce him, and immediately he fled from the situation. He ran out of the building. In the same way, when it comes to making money our masters, we must flee from that situation. We must not just let go, but flee from it and run into the arms of God. Philippians 4:11 through 13. If you've ever watched Tim Tebow at Florida, then you know verse 13, right? And how that goes. I think I've lost it here. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, or I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. There are different variations of it. But when you read it in context with the first verse, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. We see that it's almost like Paul might be saying here that the secret of being content is by drawing our strength from God. And that's the connection that I want you guys to learn to let go and to let God have your heart. Because it is God who brings us strength, who can satisfy our desires. Contentness isn't situational by definition. A lot of times I have believed that I've lived my life looking to the next stage, whether I was in 5th or 6th grade, like, oh, I want to be a high schooler. Where once I got to high school, I can't wait until college. Now that I'm in college, I can't wait until I graduate college, right? Or whether I was single, I was like, oh, I really want to date this girl. Like, I need to be in a dating relationship. And once I was in a serious dating relationship, oh, I can't wait to be married, right? And it's just this continuous cycle of desiring the next thing. But the secret of contentness is that it is not about our situations, but where we are. And God is there in all of it. So step one in learning to find this contentness is to ask yourselves, where is my heart? And I want you to think about that for a second. Where do I place my heart? And if you can't quite answer that question, I want you to think of the top 3 things you spent your money on this week, your spare money. Where did you spend your free time? When you look at those things, that is probably where your heart is. The biggest indicator of our heart, of our desires, is in typically how we spend our money and how we spend our time. And Jesus put it this way, for where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. If your treasure is going to the movie theater all the time, or getting coffee every morning and every afternoon, or if it's in desserts, or if it's in fulfilling your desires of pleasure, then that is where your heart is in those pleasurous desires. If all your money goes under your mattress and you guard it with your life, then your heart is bent on security. And it's finding it in the most temporary version of it. So where is your heart today? John Wesley had 3 rules when it came to how we handle money. He said, first, gain all you can. Then save all you can, and then thirdly, give all you can. And so when you look at his 3 rules, you can kind of produce two types of people. You have your gainers or your savers, people who stop after the first rule, or people who stop after the second rule, and both end up falling short of the fullness. But those who gain all they gain all they can just simply so that they can spend all they can. And those who save all they can, save it and save it and save it. And for what? For a rich that does not, or a wealth that does not end up lasting. And so if you find yourself in one of those categories, it's not an exclusive dichotomy. It's not just simply one way or another. It's just kind of a framework for how you can begin to evaluate just where you place your heart. And so once you determine where you've placed your heart, then comes the question, now I know where I place my heart, but how can I realign it? How can I place my heart in God? In Matthew 6, verses 19 through 24, says this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Wesley's 3 rules are super important because we must use our talents to gain all the things we can, gain all we can. And we must be responsible in how we use that money and how we save that money and how we handle it. But Wesley also said, nothing can be more plain than that all who observe the first 2 rules without the third will be 2-fold more the children of hell than they ever were before. That's very powerful. You see, where we give our money and our time reflects the attitude of our heart. We discussed that earlier. And so by giving it to God, by giving the first of our time, and by giving the first of our money to God, it helps us realign our hearts and say, God, you are the first in my heart. God, I want to give you my heart. I want to give you the fullness of where I am at. And also when you do that, it can help you. You gain that contentness in life. And Wesley also said this: what way then, I ask again, can we take that our money may not sink us to the nethermost hell? There is one way, and there is no other under heaven. If those who gain all they can and save all they can will likewise give all they can, then the more they gain, the more they will grow in grace, and the more treasure they will lay up in heaven. The secret of contentment is this: let go of the grip you have on your money and allow God to have the fullness of your heart.